We look to the Bible as a source of inspiration, of wisdom, of knowledge, of guidance. We want the Bible to help us strengthen our faith as it speaks about God and our relationship with Him. We expect the Bible to share with us certain universal truths which, when implemented, will enable us to live more productive lives and become better people. We hope the Bible will give us answers to questions which have plagued humanity since its beginnings, and which will assist us as we strive to overcome the obstacles we face day after day after day. But what we seem to seldom realize is that the Bible, for the most part, raises more questions than it answers, and leaves us with the task of taking our understanding and interpretation of what it does say and figuring out what to do with it. The answers are there, they're just not very easy to find unless we're willing to work at it. The greatest compliment worshipers can make to me when they shake my hand at the door after a service is not "lovely message," although I don't mind hearing that. It is "you made me think." I love to hear "you made me think," whether or not the person saying it agrees with what I had to say. Sermons are supposed to make people think. They make me think while I am formulating and researching and writing them, and they should make you think after you hear them. Over the next months, I plan to deal with some Bible stories that raise particularly interesting questions. Questions which will at times make us uncomfortable. Questions which we might not see unless we delve fairly deeply into what these stories are really saying. Questions which we might more readily ask if we were not hampered by our reluctance to question God, or at least the image of God which we think is presented in the Bible. Questions which we would probably ask in any other situation that did not so directly involve the divine. Now, in order for this to work, we've got to establish certain understandings right from the beginning. The first is that I do not and will not interpret the Bible literally. The Bible is not a book of science or history, and its authors never intended that it would be used as such. The Bible is a book of theological writings which present inspired human insights as people wrestle with issues that, more often than not, are somewhat beyond total human comprehension. In other words, people trying to understand and explain life and the world and God. and they attempt to do so from within the parameters of their limited abilities and knowledge. I think at this point that we've also got to recognize that those who wrote the books included in the Bible did so centuries ago, and obviously well before the scientific discoveries which should force us to rethink many of the theological understandings of yesteryear. For example, we know so much more about the universe, its magnitude, its complexity, its magnificence, that even suggesting that what happens on earth is somehow the totality of God's concern and focus is ridiculous. Hence, much of what we find in the Bible consists of stories which are alliterative and illustrative, striving to explain the unexplainable from relatively primitive viewpoints and with relatively primitive tools, but presenting great truths nonetheless in terms of the messages thus being delivered. So let's begin then at the beginning, not chronologically regarding when these stories were written, but chronologically regarding when they supposedly took place. And so we start with the creation of the world, with special emphasis on the introduction of humanity. In two different accounts, with slightly different emphases, we are told that God did it all, and how he did it. And while the order of creation, particularly in reference to life forms, rather remarkably mirrors theories of evolution, we know, for example, that the business about the sky being a dome separating the waters above and the waters below, or the business about the stars being lights planted on this dome to brighten the earth, have no basis whatsoever in scientific reality. Anyhow, God creates the world and begins to introduce life onto our planet. And he makes a man. In one account at the beginning, after which animals are created to keep him company, but proving inadequate, a woman is produced, while in the other account, man and woman come at the tail end of the process as a sort of final achievement. It's interesting that in one story, the second, man and woman are created at the same time, and thus as equals, that's the first story, while in the other, man comes first, then all the animals, and then woman out of man as, I suppose, a kind of appendage. Well, the man and the woman are placed in the Garden of Eden, an idyllic setting where everything is provided and everything is perfect. They don't have to do a thing in order to live the good life. And there is only one rule they are expected to follow. Don't eat the fruit from the tree of life or from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why not? To do so would make them like God. They would live forever and they would know everything. The author obviously realized that people did not live forever or know everything, and he couldn't understand why. So he came up with this solution, which I suppose was as good as any other. But Adam and Eve are a bit like kids. Tell them not to do something, and of course, they do it. She picks the fruit from the tree of knowledge, urges Adam to share with her, which naturally is blamed on the snake. Their minds open, they realize they are naked, and that they broke the rule. So they try to hide from God. It doesn't work. He finds them, questions them, and throws them out of the garden after promising a few punishments because of their disobedience. What is really reflected here? The story is a fanciful response to reality. The account was the product of a man who lived in a patriarchal society where women were subservient to men, so it should not be surprising that the woman in one story is created after the man from the man. Also, people do not live forever, so obviously nobody ate of the fruit from the tree of life. But we do have inquiring minds which can learn, so the fruit was taken from the other tree. If we believe that a perfect God created a perfect world, a world which God proclaimed to be good, why is it not perfect for us? Because man and woman disobeyed God and was subsequently punished, a punishment inherited by all their descendants. That's why, again reflecting the world in which he lived, the author said that man would have to work hard to sustain life, woman would experience pain and danger in childbirth and remain subservient to her husband. Both would eventually die and return to the ground from which they came. The author was simply trying to make sense out of the world in which he lived and explain to the best of his ability why it was the way it was. The God presented in this story was pretty hard on Adam and Eve, don't you think? I mean, he gives them free will and then punishes them when they exercise that free will. And he did make the fruit pretty tempting, especially when he told them without explanation to stay away from it. I imagine the author was dealing with some of these very issues, trying to understand them, trying to explain them. He believed that when people are blessed, it comes from God. That when people are hurt, it comes from God. Is it fair then to permit people to make decisions and then punish them if they make the wrong ones, or at least ones that God apparently doesn't like? And what about second chances? Adam and Eve, you see, were pretty new to this life stuff. Surely in this case the punishment did not fit the crime, an extremely harsh punishment imposed as well on the rest of humanity to the end of time. Obviously the author was dealing with the question of why life is so hard, especially from the perspective of one who believed that God was the direct cause of everything, good or bad. According to the story, though, God apparently still loved his human children, his human creation, and he did not throw them out of paradise without some assistance. He gave them tools with which to make their way and earn their livings. He recognized, in fact, that by eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had learned what they needed to learn in order to survive, and they would know right from wrong, so they could legitimately then be held accountable for decisions they made with their free will. Again, the author is submitting imaginative and literary suggestions to explain and reflect the reality of the lives we all live. And he clothed them. He gave them skins. There is more to this than merely the making of garments out of the hides of animals. Through this act, God showed them compassion and gave them protection. He did not send them naked in every sense of the word into the world. They were not helpless. Also, the whole issue of giving them skins symbolically indicates that they now had an identity, human being. So what is really meant is that they, after their expulsion from the garden, acquired full humanity. Remember how in various places in the New Testament we are told that those who choose to follow Jesus put on Christ as if he were some sort of clothing. Again, such skins, such clothing identify us and convey something about us. In this case, Adam and Eve were covered with the mantle of God. He was theirs and they were his. And this represented his last act of assistance before their exit from the garden. Let me deal with one more issue regarding the Adam and Eve saga. To take the story literally would mean that we accept the notion that Adam was a particular man and Eve was a particular woman. It also means that we accept the notion that they had just 3 children, Cain, Abel, and Seth. So where did the wives that the 3 boys married come from? The answer is relatively simple. Adam and Eve were not specific people. They were rather symbolic of humanity in general, symbolic in the sense that what they are said to have endured is what humanity endures. And the author used them as literary figures to articulate the human condition and speculate on what caused it. In addition, the name Adam means man, and the name Eve means earth, probably referring to fertility. So that in and of itself, this indicates the author's intention. So when all is said and done, what do we have? We have an imaginative and mythic account of the creation of the world and all that inhabits it, including humanity, all of which aims at a particular and powerful pronouncement and proclamation. God did it. In the final analysis, we don't know how God did it or why God did it, but in faith we accept that God did it. And that is the whole point, the religious point, the theological point, the divine point. And what a beautiful way to get to that point.